Right, huge welcome to Thomas Sheridan with Before Freedom. Researcher, artist, author and more, Thomas examines what the powers that be might have in store for humanity now that social engineering and propaganda have reached their current level of refinement. By the powers that be, I don't mean your elected MPs, by the way. Our reality is being altered before us and for us, and most don't notice or won't believe it. Thomas tonight brings an awareness of this social emergency, and assistance can maybe expose this evil and loosen its grip on our and future generations. Thomas's website is all the W's, thomassheridanarts.com. Please welcome Thomas Sheridan.
Looking back here, and the last time I was here, I think it's around this time last year, I spoke about basically the history of monotheism, how from Zoroastrianism the idea of duality was created, a good and an evil, a good God and an evil God, and then you were put into a position where you had to choose a side. And from Zoroastrianism there was mainly monotheism came out of that, which was the Abrahamic religions, the Jehovah God, the Yahweh God, and the idea of one God, one king, one emperor, one leader. That was the end of it. At the same time, there was other interesting aspects that came out of that, such as the Cathars, which I spoke about last time, and the Bogomils, and other groups that were more flexible in their understanding and eventually came to come to see that the God of the Old Testament, they believed, was actually a psychopathic demon pretending to be God. And there's some interesting, well, shall we say, evidence regarding that. If you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses Bible, you will see that it deliberately mentions specifically that on the first page of Genesis that God created this, God created that. And then right before the creation of mankind, something appears out of the blue called Jehovah God. This thing jumps in called Jehovah God, no explanation of who Jehovah God is. And so groups like the Cathars and the Bogomils and the Gnostics believed that Jehovah or Yahweh was actually a demon, and the way he described it was a psychopathic kind of demon that was pretending to be God. Now, if you're religious or Christian or anything like that, please, I'm not here to bang any kind of drum in favour of anything. I'm not criticising anything like that. You could believe what you believe, and I'm just here, presenting what I've discovered. But tonight, I called this talk Before Freedom. And I have to be honest with you, I thought last year, when I was here last year, I thought when I'd come back this year, I'd actually be more positive. I was actually trying to see things in a more positive light. And I have to be honest with you, I've actually gone darker in how I see things. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's what I don't know if you know about me, but I've written 2 books on psychopathology. And my attitude is, if you know you're dealing with a psychopath, well, you know how to avoid them. And we're dealing with a psychopathic system that breeds a kind of infection that's damaging to the human psyche and has sort of rattled through history. Now, before I start, I'm going to be giving it up big time to royalty tonight. Please don't assume that I'm a Paddy who's come over here with a polemic, that I'm knocking your culture or anything like that. I don't like any royalty. I'm not an Irish Republican or anything like that. I'm here specifically out of the research into my most recent book, Valpurgis Night. And I just wanted to know why history went wrong. And a huge part of that would be a continuation on from this monotheistic one God. This is why I'm pretty close to an atheist at this point. However, I do believe that there are dark forces running this world, but I don't see them as a supernatural thing. I see them more as a damage, almost like a corruption of human consciousness. And that wisdom is the real issue, and I think the Enlightenment of the 1700s was never fully completed, mainly because, and I'll talk about this, it fell under the jurisdiction of royal families who had a vested interest in keeping their bloodlines going. And this is the main reason I have an issue with royalty. I don't care if it's British royalty, French royalty, Dutch, Norwegian, I don't care. My attitude is this is an archaic idea that does not belong in the modern world. And my main reason for this was I don't think it's healthy when people reduce their reproduction ideas to the level of livestock. Like, that's really, you see how, they talk about Kate Middleton, how she's a commoner. She's not a commoner. Diana wasn't a commoner either. This is just like these kind of ideas they throw out there. And I find it quite incredible how they, were told, and quite right because there's plenty of scientific evidence for this, that inbreeding causes cognitive decay over the centuries. Yet it doesn't apply to them. They're obsessed with bloodlines, they're obsessed with maintaining structures, and this is all very strange to me. I mean, I was thinking there the other night, like the first time that, again, I'm not knocking the culture, the first time that Prince William had sex with Kate Middleton, when he said, "Who's your daddy?" that wasn't a rhetorical question. You have to know. And so, this to me is some very strange way these people live, and I think they still have far too much power in the world, and I'm going to talk through this tonight. Another thing I'm quite upset about, and I don't care who hears about this in this movement, is this growing anti-Semitism. I think it's unhealthy. I think it degrades. Yes, Zionism is a problem, big time. I don't like Israel, what the state of Israel stands for, but we have to remember, we have to maintain our humanity all the time. We cannot fall into certain traps. And again, I have to stress again, I'm not telling we should hate these people I'm going to bring up tonight. We should understand what's wrong with it, avoid it, and hopefully develop as a better people. Now, I called this Before Freedom, and it sounds very grandiose. I'm coming here to say the world will rise up, and it's all going to be free. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm here to tell you we're all shagged. Honestly, it's really the way things are going with transhumanism, the growth of religious fanaticism in the Middle East and elsewhere. But freedom is not to go down that road, and not to be dragged down that road, and to rise above that, to rise above what's thrown at you. Just because transhumanism, just because religious sectarianism, just because the food has no nutritional value in it, and everything else, we avoid it. We avoid it, and I think that's the best we can do, is kind of be like the Gnostics, be like the Cathars, and pass on to the next generation. Look, we discovered this on our journey, and hopefully we can sort of create a snowball effect where I would say a group of survivors were inside the human race who hold the old knowledge inside us. And I think, whatever this thing is called, the truth movement or whatever, the alternative movement, we should really see ourselves as kind of like repositories of old knowledge, almost like we're the ones who are carrying it through for the others. Because it almost all fell apart and died before this movement started. It was like, we have such an enormous advantage because of the internet over our parents and over our grandparents, just because we had access to the internet, and that allowed us access to books that we didn't know about, obscure books and things like that, and obscure writers, and we could meet at places like this. So I'm hopeful for the future for anyone who wants it. I don't believe in victimhood as so much. My attitude is that you're either a victim or you're someone who's refusing to be hit anymore. And that's how I think we should apply our relationship with the control structure. So, as I said, I've written a recent book called Walpurgis Night Volume 1, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on. But it's an ongoing project. There's three other books in the works, maybe even more at this point. But I've been having to step back and sort of take almost an anthropological view of societies in the West and of people. And I was looking at the idea of a fracturing and a revolution. You often hear that in the United Kingdom they never had a revolution. it was never like a French Revolution. There was never like an overthrow of the government and the creation of a republic. However, there was a revolution here, but it didn't happen. And this has been another recurring theme for tonight, that revolution doesn't necessarily come with loud bangs. You know, it can be a very subtle and a cultural revolution. In 1956, the British government attempted, after Egypt had nationalised the Suez Canal, to invade Egypt along with France and Israel, in order to basically take back the Suez Canal. Now, it was described at the time in the House of Commons as an act of disastrous folly, whose tragic consequences we shall regret for all years. Yes, all of us will regret it, because it will have done irreparable damage and harm to our prestige and reputation of our country. We shall feel bound by every constitutional means at our disposal to oppose it. They weren't talking about the British people, they were talking about the British establishment, because something happened in 1956. Because of what they called the austerity years, or the stay-at-home generation, British people after World War II, the ones who were there at Dunkirk, the ones who were there in the Far East, the ones who were at D-Day, saw absolutely nothing to gain for it. I'm talking about the ordinary people who fought in the armies. When they came home, they got the NHS, and that was about it. Apart from that, they didn't see the spectacular growths in the economies that you had in places like the United States and Germany, the German miracle. It's, you know, and they were picking themselves, why isn't there a British miracle? We fought, you know, we were supposed to have won, and this kind of thing was going on. When this happened, there was a huge backlash. Draft cards were returned back, national service draft cards were returned back with bollocks and things like that written on them. We're not going. And this was a terrifying thing for the establishment in this country. It was the first time in the history of the United States, really, that ordinary people had said no. And this was also culturally very pivotal as well, because this was before rock and roll. You know, this is just on the point when things were socially changing. Young people were changing. Particularly the American idea of the teenager was starting to spill over into Europe. And people were just not going to go and die for a king or a queen like they were expected to in the past. There was a generation who said, forget about it. No. And also, there was a moral revulsion as well, in that people were better educated, was sitting at home saying, my father, my grandfather fought at Dunkirk or whatever, and he came back as no money, and he had 2 legs missing, and he had nothing to show for it. And why should we do it? So there was a growth, there was almost an exponential growth in cognitive, shall we say, processing among working class people in England. And that quotation there is really about that. What that guy is saying is like, oh shit, we're screwed. They're starting to wake up. And if you want to go back to a point in the 20th century where, I don't really like the term wake up, but where the British working class and middle classes began to wake up, it was the Suez Crisis, because they were not going to be suckered into a war where there was no benefit, because they saw their own parents did not gain from the sacrifices of World War II. And this is around the time they were really pushing the royal idea. There was the Queen was coronated and so on, and that even frightened them even more, because people were like, no, we want something more. This is not, it's not going to work anymore, sorry. You know, so 1956 was a pivotal time. And it's just to give you an example of how a revolution can happen without bombs and guns and guillotines and so on. It can happen at almost the psychic level in a society, and they can just refuse by walking away. Now, we had the youth culture came along. You had the 60s, you had swing in London, you had the mod movement, you had the rock and roll movement, you had the teddy boy, the skinhead, the ska movement, and then in 1977 you had the punk rock movement at the time of the Queen's Jubilee. Now, this is how things had gone so bad for the establishment so quickly that the #1 record had a lyric called "She Ain't No Human Being," to rhyme with "God Save the Queen." Things had changed dramatically. You know, you're talking about a seismic change in less than 2 decades that really, was convulsive and terrifying to the establishment. And I was looking at some of the parliamentary debates online from the UK government thing from this period, and these guys were shitting bricks. They were really terrified that they were going to lose control of the British society, mainly because they had no moral authority. And we'll talk about this later, but there's an infamous appearance by the Sex Pistols. I actually think it's an amazing thing, where they appeared on the kind of Bill Grundy show. And when you watch it now, you can't believe what you're seeing. You have these, at the time, they were portrayed as like animals, you know, like the lowest of the low. In reality, they were aware that Bill Grundy was actually coming on sexually to a 16-year-old girl, Susie and the Banshees, and they knew what was going on inside the BBC. This is the height of the Savile years, the height of all the sex scandals, where basically BBC presenters were helping themselves to any young teenage girl that came in the door, and these guys knew this. And so if anyone had the moral authority, it was these young lads in the Sex Pistols. So it was almost like a psychic implosion was happening, and to even have that single there was shocking at the time. And the music was amazing. I mean, that was the music I grew up on, so I'm definitely prejudiced. This is my polemic here, but this is what I grew up on, and that changed my life too. I mean, I really had no interest in pop music until I heard the Sex Pistols and the energy and everything about it. And in the years since that, what they called the filth and the fury, that generation has been validated by what's come out about the BBC. And now we have to understand why. Why? Why did this happen? Why was there corruption? Because the human consciousness is a very interesting thing. You have two poles of cognitive functioning. You have your upper awareness, your five-sense awareness, where you move in society and you deal with people and you go through life and you process experiences. But there's another one there. It's your lower, it's your under, like, I won't call it lower because it's actually in some ways higher. It's your lower poles of cognitive functioning. I'm just using this as this is the term that's used. And that's your social awareness, your instinctual awareness. There's some very good research came out recently about the left and right hemispheres of the brain. It came out 2 years ago. It was in Nature magazine, where they said the human brain is it's asymmetrical. And in that, like, one lateral hemisphere is actually a different shape than the other, when in reality it should be identical, like your hands, your eyes, and everything else. And they've now, the latest theory on that is, and it's a good one, is that one hemisphere, your right hemisphere, processes spatial awareness, what's going on around you. And the other one is immediate awareness, the left. And they reckon the reason for that is, in Paleolithic and Neolithic times, if a caveman was was spearing a fish, he had to be aware there might be a bear or a saber-toothed tiger behind him. So, but that, we have not lost that instinct. We are still aware when we're being sold a crock of shit. I'm sorry, but you know what I mean? When you know, there was that fantastic line in the Outlaw Josie Wales, "Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining." You know, there's a lot of truth to that. You just, all your life, you'll have had those experiences like, no, I'm not falling for this. But it happens on a social level. If you look at the work of Carl Jung and the idea of the collective unconscious, it happens at a social level too. And that's what happened in this country between 1956 and 1977. Now, on to these wonderful people. I live in a place in the west of Ireland called County Sligo, and there is a Gothic castle. It's a blood sports lodge on a mountain, in a very beautiful area called Classy-Bon, and it used to be the blood sports lodge of this guy. That's Lord Louis Mountbatten. That's not his real name. His real name is the incredibly English, His Serene Highness the Grand Duchy of Hesse, Prince Louis Francis Albert Victor Nicholas of Battenberg. The Germans, they're all Germans. All the royal families of Europe at this point are all Prussian or Bavarian, but they all go through the Prussians as well. Even the Hanoverians, it doesn't matter. What's left of them, they're all of German background. And I'm going to talk tonight about how deep this runs and how powerful this runs and how sad it's become for us as a species, and not people only living in monarchies or, parliamentary monarchies, or whatever we call them, or republics, were all affected by this garbage. They're still in power. They still have tremendous power.